So everybody please be advised that the recording has now started, and we will ask the bishop to open us with prayer.
Thank you very much, Alec, and welcome everybody on a beautiful, sunny, albeit extremely warm Friday afternoon. Here we are at the end of another week, and it's wonderful to be with you today. Let's begin with prayer. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we give you thanks, praise and thanksgiving for the gift of this beautiful day and the week that we have passed through. And we give you thanks for your continuing presence with us at all times and circumstances. I ask you to be present with us today in our Wardens, Treasurers, and Clergy workshop as we discuss the next steps that we will take as we continue to move through these days of pandemic and face the challenges before us. We always trust and rely, especially in the season of Pentecost, that you have sent us your Spirit to be counselor, guide, and advocate, to show us the way forward, that we may live your great commandment to love one another, to love our neighbor as ourselves, and to love you as we reach out in care and concern for those around us through these days. I ask you to be with us, to strengthen us and empower us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, we'll follow in some ways a similar routine that we've been following over these last number of weeks, and begin with my opening remarks today. And as always, and I intend to do this as long as we are on these calls, I want to start off by extending once more my deep thanks and appreciation for all that you are doing. The work that we're doing, the church buildings have been shuttered now over these last 13 weeks. I remember the first service that I did, online service down at the park in Kingston on the 15th of March, when my hair looked a lot more orderly than it does today, and how we've moved through all of these days. We just the way that you have continued to work and the effort that you have put into this, and the faithfulness to take care of our people, but while the church buildings are shuttered, the Church of Jesus Christ is vibrant, active, alive, well, and out in the world doing the ministry that has been entrusted to us, living that great commandment and great commission that has been entrusted to us. And you are the leaders of that in the various parts of the vineyard given into your care. And I can't say enough for what you have done over these days to make sure that that ministry, the pastoral ministry, the stewardship that we're called to undertake continues. And as we begin to move forward now into these next few weeks leading to September, and we've started to unfold now the reopening plan, I know that I can trust and rely upon that same diligence and faithfulness and passion that you have for the ministry entrusted to all of you, and again, my never-ending thanks for that as we continue to move forward. What I want to report on today, the way we're going to work, is I'll update you a little bit on the conversation that I had with the Provincial House of Bishops and the advice that we have been receiving, and the conversation around the staged plan for reopening that has been rolled out to you. Sort of do that from the high level, and then the phase plan, Alec will pick it up from there and look into the phase plan as we have it, and give you an idea of what we're gonna do over the next number of days and the next couple of weeks. Just to start with that, the House of Bishops met, and we continue to engage with our executive officers. We receive advice from people in the field who know what they're talking about. Epidemiologists, healthcare people who have been given tremendous gifts, I believe gifts of the Spirit, that they are putting into use in service of the church. People that are faithful church people who have been placed in the center of this to help guide us through these days. So the epidemiologists, healthcare officials on a provincial basis who have been guiding our conversation have been very helpful as we've developed this rollout plan. One of the things, I may have mentioned that on the call last Friday when we talked with them, is that we had discussed moving a plan forward that would see us back in our buildings at the earliest by the beginning of September, and they commended us on that. There are so many concerns right now that are happening with this. Things are going in the right direction. Praise be to God for that. I was watching the update from Ontario today, and I believe for the 6th straight day, we are under 200 new cases. Testing regimen, I think for the last day was up over 27,000 tests, I think, completed, which is way above the target. So there's lots of testing, lots of good results to tie into, and things are going in the right direction. As you know, the provincial reopening plan, the civil province, that is taking place, and my hope and prayer is that will continue to unfold in a way that is safe. What I'm hearing, I know in the city of Kingston, on a number of things not related to the church, but other calls that I've been involved in, is a great concern that with the opening of certain establishments in the city of Kingston, that most of the people in the contact tracing that the staff are required to do, the word is coming back that there are a lot of people from places that are still not able to open who are making their way to Kingston. And you understand, people have been cooped up for 13 weeks, but the numbers of people from Montreal and Toronto who have made their way here to enjoy some time out and stuff. So my hope and prayer is that this doesn't get anything reignited, but we're still in early days of the reopening, and so far the numbers are looking really well from what we can see. So with that, we focus, and again, I will repeat over and over again, our concern is the safety and health of our congregations and those who we minister to. That is my number one priority. I've said to you before that when if I'm going to err, I'm going to err on the side of extreme caution. I pray to God this is the only decision I ever have to make in my lifetime where getting it wrong can have disastrous consequences. And I take that deeply seriously. And many things that we deal with in the life of the church, you know, you can have debate, discussion, you make a decision and people can take you to task on it. This one is, in my mind, and you need to know where I stand with this, it's a life and death decision. And I want it to be right. And so I'm so pleased to have the people around us that have been providing us their expertise and advice and giving us confidence as we move forward with our reopening plan. So the letter was released on Wednesday, which gave you that multi-staged plan. That is a high-level common framework that we will work through in the province of Ontario. We went to a staged approach. We color-coded it, and you may have seen the document that has come out with the different coatings, red, yellow, and green, or red, amber, and green, kind of like the traffic light. Well, it is the traffic light. And just so that it doesn't get confused with the provincial numerical numbering of phased opening. They're going stage 1, 2, and 3. So we decided for us, we'll use the color coding. And as you see, and Alec will go into it a little bit more smaller detail in a bit, but just to talk about that phased reopening. We're going to discuss that today, and we want to hear your feedback on that. You've had an opportunity to take a look at it. The hope here is that we can discuss that high-level staged reopening in this document that came, the provincial template or provincial framework. We're in the process, as I said in the letter, now of pulling together a task force that will relate specifically to the Diocese of Ontario. There will be people on that who have expertise in infection control, public health, those sorts of things, to be able to advise us as we roll out the small detail around how reopening will happen in the churches of the diocese. Next Friday, after we receive our input from today, on Monday, we are going to look at a revision of our guidelines as we move towards what I'm hoping is those guidelines that you have now will remain in full force and effect until we move into the red stage. And the anticipation is that a week from Monday, we will move into the red stage. This coming Monday, based on the feedback we get today, and we'll start looking at the small detail related to the Diocese of Ontario. That will be sent out to all of you on Wednesday in advance of the Friday call next week, so that you can have a chance to have a look at it and get ready to provide your feedback and input to us on that. And then once we get that on the Friday, then on the weekend, we finalize everything, and then we roll ourselves out into the red stage on Monday. And so then we'll move through from there. Over that period of time, the task force will begin to work, and Alec will talk a little bit more detail about that three-stage framework in the small detail. I think perhaps, Alec, I might have given enough sort of preamble to this. Is there anything that you think I've missed before I turn it over to you to start looking at the smaller detail of this?
No, I think you've covered the overview nicely, and of course your letter that went out to the diocese, along with the bishop's framework, and we're assuming everybody's had access to that message. Okay, well then let's get into a little more detail then. As the bishop mentioned, there are 3 stages in the framework that's been released by the House of Bishops, and those 3 stages, as he mentioned, rather than confusion with other like the provincial phases, they decided to go with red, amber, and green. So let's begin with the red phase, which is the phase that, as the bishop mentioned, we would intend on entering on June the 29th, once we've worked through the guidelines and rolled them out next week. So the first thing is that corporate, or if you will, live attendance worship, our worship will still be by live stream or pre-recorded as it is today. So that's not really changing. What the framework will allow is small weddings, funerals, and emergency baptisms. And again, those will be outside of the building, but now this will open up a little more for weddings, and open up a little bit for the clergy, and where there's an emergency baptism. But again, these will all be outside of our church buildings. We'll allow one-on-one in-person pastoral care where that is viewed by the clergy as being essential, and by pastoral visitors. Again, there'll be guidelines wrapped around that, but the continuing need for distancing and protection. Church offices will be permitted to reopen once the criteria has been met, whether the distancing and the other pieces that'll come out next week are in place. And again, that is to protect employees, and to protect the clergy, as well as to protect those that may be coming into church offices. Small meetings, and again, the details will wrap around this, where physical distancing is possible. But again, online options will still be the preferred course. Continuing with vital food security and community ministries to vulnerable, again, with the appropriate protections in place and within the context that the local public health unit permits. The church buildings remain closed, but this now does start to open up where there are renters that have them, where they can be in accordance with the regulations that are in place. And this is one that churches can then start to have this discussion with those that have a long-term lease. This is more intended towards those that have leases around space in churches. And then finally, food and beverages in any context are not to be shared or served, and detail will come around that as well. So the red stage is really opening up a little more from where we are today, but still remains with our buildings closed and doing as much online as possible. When we then are able to, and right now that's viewed as being September at the earliest, because it will take, again, the conditions in the province, the conditions and the experience being correct. And again, we expect that we'll have criteria that each church will have to work through to be able to go to the amber stage. That's anticipated being no earlier than September. And here's what it will look like. Corporate worship can be resumed, but again, within that will be the protection, the distancing that is required to try and ensure that there is a safer environment. The Eucharist can be celebrated, but it'll be done so only in one kind. Singing by soloists or small ensembles, a small choir, may be permitted where there's appropriate physical distancing. And that will adjust depending upon the building that each church is in. There are churches where the distancing may mean there can be no more than two. On the other hand, there may be churches where that could be a dozen. It's going to depend on distancing, but this is intended to be able to do some music, but congregational singing is still not included. The peace will be shared, but obviously that's going to be in a non-contact kind of way. Online services will continue to be offered in addition to the in-person worship. First of all, there are those that will not be comfortable attending, and that needs to be a choice they can make. Secondly, is that as we have many of churches are now discovering, they're reaching out to people that they've not otherwise been able to. So the expectation is the online pieces will continue. Larger in-person meetings may resume where physical distancing is possible. So for example, a parish council meeting, ACW, those kinds of things, where again, with the physical distancing requirements of the hall, that is possible, or the meeting room. Food and beverages are not sure, they're shared at coffee hours and meetings and potlucks. And routine pastoral care may resume. And again, there'll be definition around what the heightened hygiene practices to ensure that there's safety there. And then in a time frame that really I don't think anybody has kind of prognosticated to, we would enter the green stage. And I think, from my perspective, I kind of think of this as what the new normal will be. And that'll be where corporate worship, we can continue as a group, the Eucharist in both kinds without intinction as we go forward. Choir and congregational singing fully resumes. The sharing of the peace can resume probably with some modifications. Online services continue as an extension of our worship life, and meetings, coffee hours, hall rentals, social and fundraising events, etc., can resume. And again, there's no real definition yet around when that time is going to be. So this is at this point our anticipated timing. So as the bishop mentioned, by the middle of next week, we will put the guidelines for the red stage out. That work has already begun. We'll finish that up early next week and send that out. That will then be reviewed in detail on this call next Friday. And then assuming that all has proceeded and everything is sort of folded together, the plan is that the Diocese of Ontario would move to the red stage on Monday, June the 29th. So a week from Monday. At that point, next week, we're also going to begin the work with the task force looking at the amber stage. And so that work will roll through and is anticipated that we'll be developing that plan and working through the guidelines over June and July. And that will then lay the framework, which then in August and September will get rolled out and implemented, each church with a specific plan, because every building is different, every congregation is different, and so each context. So what we'll be doing is putting together what the minimum requirements are, what the recommended best practices are. Each church will then work through how they're going to address it and submit that back as a plan. And once that plan's been reviewed and cleared, then that church, once the diocese is able to enter the amber phase, would then be cleared to go. And so that's where we sit as a group. Wayne, do you have anything you want to add in terms of the work around the guidelines for next week?
Alec, the one thing I would add is that we now have a draft of the guidelines developed today. It needs to be refined some more. And again, to reiterate the timeline of mid next week, having it circulated to the folk of the diocese. But hopefully we will have touched on all the necessary points in it under the rubric of caution, health, and safety.
Great, thank you, Wayne. Anything, while we're just covering this part of it, anything you want to add on the cemetery front?
Just very briefly, our cemeteries for the time being should remain closed apart from the existing identified safety and interment practices. We are moving toward monument construction. If any of you in your churches have that in process, that may resume at any time, provided it does not coincide with an interment or other essential safety work being done at that day and hour.
Great.
The other thing I would add, there is some information out about graveside services with a maximum of 50 people being able to attend. There are staffing issues around that. The guideline from the BAO is that for every 10 people at the cemetery, there must be one staff person, and any extra cost associated with that is assumed to be borne by the family, not the funeral home. You will see that we are likely looking to err on the side of caution and maintain the stance that the maximum number that should attend is in fact not 50, but the lesser number of 10, plus funeral staff. Thanks, Alec.
Thanks, Wayne. I think the other clarity I think we discussed this week was that where there is not a funeral home, that the BAO looks upon the cemetery owner, or in this case, the cemetery board, where there is a private interment and there's not a funeral home involved. Cemetery board then becomes responsible for the supervision and all those pieces as the funeral home would have been. That's an important thing for us for a lot of our smaller cemeteries. So, in the spirit of truly dynamic, this chart changed just before the meeting. So when I drafted these yesterday, with a heavy heart, but a joy, happy on one side and heavy on another. The view at that point from all the data was that clearly we did not qualify for period 3, because our May across all of our churches, the good news is that the total income, and I realize this is in total, not there are lots of church by church variances, but the total was only down 6%. And so that's a good news story, and that speaks overall to the faithfulness, to the hard work, the stewardship that's going on in our churches. But of course, the dark corollary to that is that we're nowhere near qualifying for CEWS, the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy, which we received in March and April. However, as we mused some more about that late this morning, and then in consultation with our accounting, with our audit partner, who also provides us with some financial advice and guidance, took the idea back and said, but if we've already been paid for April because we automatically qualified for April because we qualified in March. And the rule is when you qualify in one period, the next one you're automatically eligible for. So what we believe right now is that when I went through the detail of our April numbers, we sit for the month of April at 30.06% decline or reduction in revenue. So at 30.06 reduction, we would qualify for April as a standalone month, which we believe would mean that we would automatically qualify for May, regardless of the number. Now, this is literally hot off the press. It's gone from musing in the last few hours to we believe this is the case. We are, and I've got this in red, we are confirming the details. But if we have been, if the logic we are currently using is correct, then even though May as a period we would not make it, we would qualify for May because of April. And if that is the case, and we are able to confirm that today and Monday, our intention would then be to apply for the month of May, and expecting that the following week we would receive the cash, and that would be in time for us to apply it to the June payroll invoices. I will again just preface that and say that is in red capital letters. That's what we believe, but we are confirming that that is the case. We would then have to reapply for June as June and go from there. But so that's what I can tell you now. Obviously, next Friday on this call, I will be able to give you the details and the update in terms of what we've been able to do. Last thing to touch on from the prepared material, the pandemic financial response team, we actually met yesterday, and the bishop joined us for that meeting. We've done a major review of financial data, and we've also pulled together a lot of parish statistics from the information sheets, and we've been able to pull that together and do some analysis in some ways we haven't been able to do previously. There is a draft ministry survey which has been prepared, and several of you have worked through a test run that Wayne and Canon Michael Reed have worked with a couple of churches. That'll be part of this, and then it's all going to come to Synod Council next Tuesday night in terms of a proposal for providing assistance to churches that will meet certain criteria for support. And so again, obviously next Friday on this call, we'll be able to talk about that depending upon decisions or directions that are taken from Synod Council next Tuesday night. And that, I believe, covers everything that we wanted to cover from a prepared material perspective. Bishop or Wayne, do you have anything else you want to add before we jump to Q&A?
Oh, I'm fine. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, and one of the things we're hoping for is to get some feedback, which will help us as we start to move into the small detail around the guidelines that will be produced, getting us to the red stage. So anything that you want to provide and add or thoughts, like I say, this is recorded. We can take that all down and look at it as we're working through this. But again, just to say, you know, it's a decision. One of the things that gives me a great deal of confidence in what we're doing is the fact that there's such a breadth of people, including yourselves, who are a part of weekly, regular conversations and input into what we're doing. So there's transparency. We know what we're doing, but we value what you have to add to it as well, so that we make the best decision we possibly can. And so again, with that, I'm just happy to move on to Q&A.
Great, thank you. So as always, you have a couple of choices for asking questions. One is obviously to ask it verbally. You can also go to the chat bubble, which is that up in the top right corner of your screen. You should have that round circle that looks like I still like to think of it as the old bubble from a comic strip or a comic book. You can ask the question. Laura Conway is online, and I think Laura has her audio back. She had a little problem earlier, but and then Laura will ask the questions on your behalf. So, does anybody have questions?
I have a question. Oh, sorry, Bill. Do you want to go first, Bill?
Is it still safe to say ladies go first?
Chivalry is not dead, Bill.
I defer to your rank.
I'm the lowest rank of the military, so that's okay. Thank you. I just have one question. When it comes to the green stage, Alex, you had said that communion would kind of go back to normal with not just the bread but the wine as well. But how is that going to work when we can't go back to the common cup?
Bishop, you want to?
Yeah, I think when we when we get to developing, I was having a hard time to hear your question. I think I got it. The question is around the common cup, and at the green stage, the common cup would be made available again to the people, and with but there will be guidelines around how you administer that and those sorts of things. At that point, we're sort of in the new normal post-COVID situation at that point. So there we'll be looking at guidelines around that when we get there. It's still work in progress.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bishop.
I would encourage anyone who's on the call, if not asking a question, could you mute your screen? I think from what I'm seeing in the thing at the top, there's some screens are open, and we're getting feed through loops.
I think just and further to AJ's question, I think it's also fair that that green stage, I think just as we had discussed it, would probably we would only enter that stage once there is a population that has immunity, and that you're back out with a vaccine and the so-called herd immunity. And so I think it's fair to say the green stage is well down the road.
Great. Thank you both.
And
Thank you.
Bill, then having been a gentleman and holding, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you. It's rare that you ever call me a gentleman.
Thank you. I'll write it down.
You heard it here. A Habs fan called a Leaf fan a gentleman.
All right, let's not push your luck. Don't push your luck.
Alex, in the red stage, it notes the church buildings are closed to the public except where tenants or licensees are permitted to operate according to provincial, local, and diocesan guidelines. Currently, the only tenant I have at St. Thomas's is another church. It's a small church. They were a house church, kind of outgrew people's living rooms, and they've been renting our church basement for worship. Would it be okay for them to return? So it's going to be a little awkward that this church can meet, but mine can't.
That's correct. So the intention there is that and that's where the term leasee comes from. There are people that rent your church or rent your halls, etc., on a point-to-point, on an informal basis, versus people, and this was more intended. I think this come out of some of the bigger dioceses where they have Montessori schools, ballet schools, nursery, those kinds of formal businesses running out of them. So where someone has a signed lease agreement, that at this point you will be able to live up to within the context if they are allowed. So for example, and I do believe, Bill, you guys do have a nursery or daycare program there. They would
no.
Sorry?
That That building blocks has closed upon the death of its owner
Oh,
a few months ago.
that's sad. But if they were still functioning, they would, and they have a lease with you, but they would of course need to then live to the provincial regulations around a nursery school. And that would be so there's a difference between someone that rents your hall and someone that has a lease arrangement with you. From an ecumenical basis, the position has been that if we're not worshiping in our churches, our buildings are closed for worship, and that will apply across the board, not just for our congregation, but for those that would otherwise use the building.
This is too kind of a different than it's an irony because of the ecclesiastical connection, but it is a landlord and tenant issue that's being addressed here. It's the responsibility of that congregation to provide the safety procedures that they have mandated for themselves if they have a denominational authority or if they're a congregational church. However, they're adhering to the provincial standards and guidelines, and that is on them. One of the challenges that we're going to face over these next couple of months, as you know, different faith groups and different Christian denominations are moving forward at different paces based on what the provincial government has permitted. As you know, the government of Ontario has spoken about this 30% of your building capacity rule, which has been interpreted to mean 30% of your fire code number, and then physically distanced. And it's, some have looked at that. They've made the decisions that they have taken. And from the Anglican side of it, based on the advice we get from the epidemiologists who have spoken to us and said that this is, that decision flies in the face of every other thing that's going on. My understanding from the Bereavement Authority of Ontario, from Wayne's webinar that he had, much pushback from the funeral homes and funeral directors related to this 30% rule. There's a lot of bile been churned up there about it. So there's it's an issue that's going to differ denomination to denomination. This is a decision that we've taken for the Anglicans in the province of Ontario, based on the advice that we have received. So you'll have those kinds of ironies happening, but we'll get through these next couple of months.
Laura, can we take some questions from the chat?
Will the diocese be providing guidelines on activities churches will need to go through in order to open up the church hall for rentals?
That'll, as part of the red package that'll come next week, there will be checklists that will come relating to the building. So the guidelines that Wayne mentioned that will be updated for the pastoral ministerial side. And then we'll also be updating with checklists around building requirements for rentals and for the office to be open.
I have another question regarding a July wedding. Looks like the couple had heard that 50 people were allowed to attend an outdoor wedding. Are clergy allowed to officiate at an outdoor wedding? And if so, what is the number of guests?
I'd be happy to answer that. As you know, presently, the guideline is a maximum of 5 people. Assuming that the revised guidelines are approved and vetted properly, small outdoor weddings may occur with a maximum of 10 people, including the officiating clergy.
Thanks, Wayne. Laura, from the line.
Yep, this is another one that Wayne might be able to answer. In regards to the restrictions on singing, do they apply immediately or only when we move back to congregational in-house worship?
I believe it would apply when we move to the amber stage of reopening.
Right now, just to add into that, right now we have recorded services that are happening. It's one of the things that are permitted in the building where distancing is possible and the numbers are there around the recording of services. So that's not affected by that. This is when we start to bring people back into the building. And that's the amber stage that relates to.
Okay, Laura, want to go ahead?
Once the church is open, and if someone contracted the COVID-19 virus, can the church and or wardens be sued?
And I think the answer to that, of course, anyone can file a legal action for any cause. That's part of life these days. What there would be a requirement for such a suit to go forward is there would need to be proof that there was some type of negligence. That's what things are based on. Should that be the case, and provided that everybody's acting within the framework of what's been set, then if a warden was sued, and normally when someone sues, they sue the church, they will sue the wardens, and they'll sue the diocese, because you cast the net as wide as possible in the search for money. But wardens are, when they're acting within the course of their duties and the course of their authority, are protected by the director insurance that is part of each church's insurance policy. So provided you're, provided you're working within the framework, then there is that full coverage. And again, one of the things we're consulting with as we go forward in this is we will be getting provincially an opinion from ecclesiastical, because with the exception of the Diocese of Huron, everybody else in the province uses ecclesiastical, different brokers in some cases. So we're going to be confirming with ecclesiastical both that they are happy with and that the guidelines we put in place with their full support.
And that'll give you, I believe, as full a measure of confidence. As Alec pointed, you can't, if somebody wants to initiate an action, they can initiate it, but we do everything in our power. That's why we're laying out these guidelines. That's why there will be checklists. That's why there's due diligence. There's many things that you can point to along the way that will assist you as you carry out your duties. And as Alex said, if the insurance company signs off and says, yeah, this is fine, and we move forward, the chances, and you can never say with 100% certainty, but the chances of any lawsuit being successful, if somebody contracted COVID and the contact tracing came back to the parish of X, I think you can have a good level of confidence around that. That's why these decisions are being taken with as much due diligence as we can wrap around it. I shared on my Facebook page just before this meeting began a news article that was sent to me from Sheboygan, a friend of mine who's in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and a church there that opened following all the protocols of the state. Ours is 30% capacity. Theirs is 25% capacity with distancing. Church followed all that, and in spite of that, contact tracing had 23 to 25 individuals that contracted COVID as a result of attending that church service. They've now shut down and gone back to online worship services. So again, this disease, as the medical officers of health have said over and over again, is unpredictable. It is highly infectious, and that's why we're taking that due diligence. So I think you can have great confidence in that. And the other thing too is when we roll out our amber stage, unless the situation with the province has changed dramatically, that we will be more conservative than the provincial government guidelines.
Thanks, Bishop. Laura, sorry, I see Jerry.
Yeah, Alex, at some point, will we insist that people, especially the people that are officiating, get a regular test?
So that there's discussion on a range of pieces around where the role that testing plays. There's discussion around where's the role of temperature checking. There are those that would advocate that because again, someone mentioned about contact tracing. that there is a line of thinking that says when someone comes into church, they are going to need to sign that they are, give contact information so that if there is something occurs, there can be tracing. There are those that I'm sure when we go to our insurance company, they're going to say, well, the best thing to do would be to ask for a waiver. So when I go to come to church on Sunday, I'll then have a form in front of me that says, I've not been anywhere I shouldn't, that was COVID, I've not come in contact, I don't have any symptoms, and I agree to here's my contact information, and I waive the church wardens and church from any legal responsibility. I mean, that's how far, if we follow the legal beagles, that's where we would go. That would include potentially, there are those that say, well, maybe those that are regularly in front, wardens and sides people, etc., should be tested. That's an area that we are going to have to explore with those with the expertise and try and balance what is hospitable, practical with what is best practice in terms of safety and hygiene. That'll be a balance, without question.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry.
It's Wendy Kowalski here. Just wondering for clarification regarding the serving of food and drink. I totally understand that. Often people bring a water bottle with them. Will they be able to drink from it while they're in a building?
So again, we need to double check this with the health experts, but the thinking that went into the way that was worded was that, for example, an AA meeting where they are typically great consumers of coffee, that you can't brew coffee on site, but if you came with a Tim Hortons, that would be okay, because that cup remains in my possession. I'm not sharing cups that may have come from someone who else has touched it. I'm not sharing a coffee pot that someone else may have touched. So there is the thinking, and again, this needs to be confirmed, that those coming in would be able to bring something with them, but not have anything served by. And again, that's early days. You can't quote me on that yet, but that's the thinking that's underlaid that. To be honest,
Thank you.
if you put me through a long meeting without a coffee, I might get grumpy. Sometimes I get grumpy with the coffee. Laura, thank you, Bill. Laura, any other questions on the?
Yeah, there are two more.
Okay.
What's the timeline for the diocese issuing its standards for the yellow phase and parishes submitting their plans?
So I'm presuming that means the amber phase. So the timeline for the amber phase, we're going to prepare that work with the task force in June and into July. And then July and August, we will do the training and rollout of it. And it's then expected, assuming that the conditions are clear to go to the amber phase, that would happen. The churches would then start in the latter part of August and into September, completing their plans and submitting them back. That's the timeline we're currently working to. That'll get a little more detailed as the group starts its work.
And the last question in the chat, will there be different guidelines for halls that are attached and those that are separate from our church buildings?
No, that'll be the issue is not whether it's attached to the church or not. The issue is it's of the building itself, not regardless of one's attached to the other. Any other questions? I mean, I know it's kind of a lot in a piece, and next week will be even more detailed. The intention, as both the bishop and Wayne have outlined, is that the actual guidelines will come out a couple of days before the meeting, so that you'll have the opportunity to review them and get your head around them before we walk through on the Friday. Be able to ask questions, and then finally, if there's anything that we need to tune, then that can happen over the weekend, and before we get to the move to the red phase on the Monday. And of course, all of this is predicated, as always, on the larger context around us, remaining in the right space. There is every possibility that we may get down the road and we have to back up. That, depending on what happens in the province, in our individual health units, etc., it is quite possible that we may, bishops have said that in a letter, that we may need to be flexible and nimble enough to be able to back up for a time. If anyone does come up with a question, please feel free to drop an email back to the pandemic line or to the bishop or Wayne or myself, and we'll ensure that questions get answered, or that it gets reflected into what we're doing with guidelines. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share, or anything else we'd like to talk about?
Hi, Alex. Trish here. I was talking to Wayne earlier, and he suggested I share with you. We've created a vacation Bible school in a bag. The idea being kids could come pick up a bag for a week, which would have individual bags for each day with snack items, with a story, with some sort of craft activity and supplies. So I don't know if people are probably already thinking about vacation Bible schools. It's an option. If you're interested in our framework, please drop me an email and happy to share it.
That's great.
Thank you.
So it's kind of a mostly virtual VBS with.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be virtual. Kids don't have to connect online. They can just go through the books. There will be a little story for them to read. And as I said, associated crafts and snacks. But we will have a daily video with a story that they can connect to, like us reading the story, and possibly even a closed Facebook group where the kids could interact with one another through their parents' Facebook account.
Great idea.
It's called Creation at Home. It's obviously based on creation.
Good. I understand there's been some applications received on the media front, on the technological grants side of it. I think some of those have been coming in.
Yep, and Mark and I were going to look at those this morning. However, we dispatched Mark to do a video for us this morning, but Mark and I will, and so we will start that work next week in terms of looking at the ones we have received. So we'll get those.
We're looking forward to that video. Mark's gone up. I think I can share this, can't I? Mark's gone up to Parham and is interviewing Lois Webster. You might have saw Lois on the CTV news. He's interviewing Lois, and we're kind of getting a living archive of St. James Parham, and it's something we're going to start doing. It'd be kind of fun to do over our different parishes and have that kind of living archive.
Great. Well then, Bishop, can we turn back to you for closing prayer and blessing?
Thank you. Great. Thank you very much, everybody, again for your efforts on this call and all the work that you're doing. And so we close with the grace. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all evermore. Amen. Blessings, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the day and a great weekend.
Thanks, folks. Talk to you next week.